What would you do if the whole world thought someone was guilty and the only one who believed in them was an 8-year-old girl who had nothing to gain? The courtroom was packed, so tight you could smell the anxiety in the air. Every breath was a whisper, every heartbeat a drum roll. And in the middle of it all sat a man who was once hailed as America's golden genius, now shackled, vilified, and abandoned when it mattered most. His name was Caleb Thornwell, a 26-year-old tech founder once dubbed the people's billionaire. He wasn't born into wealth, no silver spoon, no Ivy League halo, just a dream and a broken laptop in a Bakersfield garage that became the seed of BrightPath, a revolutionary app that helped marginalized youth access jobs, mentors, and scholarships during the pandemic. He was loved until he wasn't. 3 months ago, a fire broke out in an abandoned warehouse in St. Louis. Inside, police found Victor Hale, one of Caleb's fiercest corporate rivals, unconscious and barely breathing. The scene was brutal. A bloody pipe, burn marks, a warehouse camera offline. And then, a damning detail, a witness claimed they saw Caleb nearby. The media went nuclear. "Billionaire beats rival in secret deal dispute," screamed one headline. "From hero to handcuffs," declared another. Now sitting at the defendant's table, Caleb stared at the empty chair next to him. His defense attorney, Derek Vaughn, had just done the unthinkable. The man closed his briefcase, stood up, and said with the coldness of marble, "Your Honor, I'm withdrawing from representation, effective immediately." Gasps rolled through the courtroom like thunder. People twisted in their seats. Phones went up. Tweets fired. Hashtags were born on the spot. But in the third row behind the defense table, someone small remained still. Her name was Zaria Monroe. She was 8. She had beads in her braids and wore a borrowed dress 2 sizes too big. No one had noticed her when she entered. No one cared who she was. But in less than 60 seconds, she'd shake the foundation of that courtroom. The judge, Edwin Reiner, frowned from the bench, a twitch in his right brow. "Mr. Vaughn, this is highly irregular." "I understand, Your Honor," Vaughn replied, "but I can't represent someone who won't be honest with me." It was a dagger. Caleb clenched his jaw. He had been honest, but none of that mattered now. Then came the moment that changed everything. A voice, small, clear. "I can defend him." Silence, then whispers, then nervous laughter. The judge leaned forward. "Excuse me." Zaria stood up. Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. "I said, I can defend him." Someone laughed. Another person started filming. A bailiff stepped forward, unsure if this was some kind of prank. "What's your name, little girl?" the judge asked. "Zaria Monroe." "And how old are you?" "8, gasps, scoffs. "I know I'm not a real lawyer," she added quickly, "but I read about this case. I know he didn't do it. I know it in my bones." The prosecutor chuckled. "Your Honor, really?" But Judge Rayner raised his hand. "Let her speak." The room froze. No one saw that coming. Zaria stepped into the aisle like she'd done this 1,000 times. Her small hands gripped her notebook like armor. "He saved my brother's life 2 years ago," she said softly. Caleb's head turned sharply, his brows furrowed. "I remember his face. I remember what he did. My brother was in his mentorship program. We were so poor we didn't even have Wi-Fi, but Caleb gave tablets and internet to every kid in our building." She paused, her knuckles white on the bench in front of her. "My brother was going to college because of him, but he died last year." The room fell silent like a rug pulled from beneath it. "I want to speak for Mr. Thornwell," she said, "because nobody else will. And if that's not allowed, maybe this court don't care about the truth." The judge sat back slowly. "And this is where I pause to say something important. Because I've seen a lot of courtroom scenes in movies and many of them feel fake. But this moment, it was real. And if you've ever been in a place where truth feels like a whisper in a room full of shouting lies, then you know how powerful one voice can be." The judge didn't throw her out. In fact, he let Zaria sit near the front as a court officer scrambled to figure out if she had a parent or guardian nearby. Someone live-streamed the whole thing. And within 5 minutes, the entire country was watching. "Zaria speaks" trended. "Kid lawyer" exploded. People didn't know what they were witnessing, only that it felt important. Back at the defense table, Caleb Thornwell was silent. The man once hailed as a savior of youth, now accused of trying to kill a corporate rival, looked at this child who had nothing, and she had more courage in one sentence than his high-paid attorney had in weeks. He wanted to say thank you, but what do you say to a kid who just stood up when the whole world sat down? Court recessed for 20 minutes, but nothing was the same. 2 hours earlier, Zaria's day had started like any other. The one-bedroom apartment smelled like last night's fried chicken. Grandma's oxygen machine hummed in rhythm with the soft snoring from the couch. Zaria tiptoed around her. She had school in an hour, but she wasn't going. Not today. Today was bigger. She pulled on her faded jacket and picked up a worn-out backpack. Inside wasn't homework or snacks. It was a spiral notebook stuffed with printed articles, notes, and photos of Caleb Thornwell. Because Zaria didn't just believe in his innocence. She knew it. And that made her dangerous to the lie everyone else wanted to believe. Inside the courthouse hallway, reporters buzzed like hornets. No one could get enough of the story. A kid tries to defend a disgraced billionaire. Meanwhile, Zaria sat quietly in a small waiting room as a court officer asked gently, "Sweetheart, who's your guardian?" "My grandma. She's at home." "You got a number?" Zaria scribbled it down. But Grandma Joyce was a deep sleeper, and that oxygen machine had a way of drowning out everything. She sat, waited, legs swinging, and then the door creaked open. It was him, Caleb, still cuffed, 2 deputies behind him. He looked at her like she wasn't real. "You," he whispered. "Yeah," she said simply. "Why would you do that?" She shrugged. "Because you didn't do it." His throat bobbed. "You don't even know me." "Yes, I do," Zaria replied. "You helped my brother." Caleb blinked. "I'm sorry, I didn't know he passed." She nodded like she wasn't surprised. "You gave him something nobody else did. That means something." Before he could respond, the deputies pulled him back toward the side door. Zaria sat in that little room, gripping her notebook, heart thumping. She had memorized everything. Flight times, digital footprints, the motive behind the headlines. If the court let her speak again, she was ready. But what neither she nor Caleb knew was that someone was watching. And the moment Zaria opened her mouth in court, she became a threat, not just to the case, but to the powerful people who needed Caleb Thornwell to stay guilty. The courtroom was packed again the next morning, tighter than before, sweat and anticipation clinging to the wooden benches like humidity before a storm. Reporters whispered in corners, checking angles for their live streams. Protesters and supporters shouted outside the courthouse doors. But inside, the world held its breath. And there in the front row sat Zaria Monroe, braids freshly combed, same dress, same fire in her eyes. She clutched her notebook tighter than ever, like it held the fate of someone who meant something. Because to her, Caleb Thornwell wasn't just a name in a headline. He was the only person who had ever made her brother believe he could be more than a statistic. When the judge entered and court resumed, Caleb shuffled in, wrists bound, eyes heavy. He looked older than 26, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 weeks. But when he caught sight of Zaria, sitting tall, giving him a subtle nod, something shifted in his posture. Hope. However small, it was still alive. The prosecutor was ready to bury Caleb. He approached the bench, confident, loud. "Your Honor, the state maintains that Mr. Thornwell had both the opportunity and motive to assault Mr. Hale. His phone pinged near the location, and he had thousands of dollars hidden in his office, possibly hush money or preparation for flight. It's a clear-cut case." "Objection!" a small voice interrupted. The entire courtroom turned. Again. It was Zaria, standing. Again. Judge Reiner slammed his gavel. "Miss Monroe, you are not authorized to object in this court. Please." "Just one thing," Zaria pleaded, stepping forward. "Please, if I'm wrong, I'll sit down and never talk again. But if I'm right, you'll know he didn't do it." Reiner stared at her, frustrated and fascinated. He rubbed his temples, then said, 30 seconds. Make it count." Zaria walked to the bench like it was a pulpit. She flipped her notebook open and smacked a page on the prosecution table. "This," she said, pointing to a printed screenshot, is a public BrightPath email archive. Caleb Thornwell didn't work alone. His first partner was Trevor Maddox. They co-founded the company, but Trevor disappeared after a lawsuit. Murmurs started again. And guess what? Trevor met with Victor Hale's lawyers last week. I found the visitor logs. The prosecutor scoffed. Irrelevant? Then explain, Zaria continued without missing a beat, why Trevor Maddox booked a flight to St. Louis the same night the warehouse fire happened. This time, the buzz in the courtroom sounded like thunder. Reporters scrambled. Phones were raised. Judge Reiner leaned forward. Counsel, is this true? The prosecutor stuttered. I am not aware of that information. Reiner's voice dropped an octave. Then I suggest you get aware. He banged the gavel. Court is in recess for 2 hours while I review this evidence. Caleb sat stunned. He looked at Zaria as if seeing her for the first time, like she wasn't just a kid anymore, but the key to his freedom. And for the first time in this mess, the public started to wonder, had they been wrong all along? I want to pause here for a second and just say something real, because sometimes when the whole system seems stacked against you, it takes someone completely unexpected to cut through the noise. And in this case, it wasn't a Harvard lawyer. It wasn't a famous advocate. It was an 8-year-old girl with a spiral notebook and a fire no one could extinguish. While the world waited for Judge Reiner's decision, something else unfolded behind the scenes. Zaria and Caleb weren't the only ones aware of Trevor Maddox. Trevor himself had been watching. From a black SUV parked 2 blocks away, he stared at his phone, reading article after article. His face, once invisible in Caleb's story, was now starting to pop up in hashtags and conspiracy threads. And Trevor didn't like that, not one bit. Inside the courthouse, Zaria sat in a side room with her grandmother, Joyce, who'd finally made it down to the courthouse after being hounded by reporters all morning. I can't believe you went viral, Joyce muttered, scrolling through a news clip of Zaria's courtroom speech. Girl, you're trending more than the president. I had to say something, Zaria replied. Nobody else was going to. Joyce looked at her for a long second, then finally smiled, shaking her head. You got your mama's stubborn in you, Zaria grinned. That's a compliment. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in a holding cell, replaying everything. Zaria's voice, her evidence, her unshakable belief. It didn't make sense. Why would she fight for him? Why care? And then he remembered what she'd said. Because nobody believed my brother either. It hit him hard, because the truth was, Malik Monroe had sent Caleb a message once, thanked him for the mentorship program, told him he wanted to build apps too. But Caleb had never replied. He was too busy, too important. And now the sister of that same kid was doing what no adult would. And that shame was heavier than any pair of handcuffs. 2 hours later, when Judge Reiner returned, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a blade. He looked stern, serious, but then his tone shifted. This court has serious concerns about the integrity of the state's case. A pause. And even greater concerns about the thoroughness of this investigation. All eyes turned to the prosecutor. His face flushed. Therefore, I am ordering the immediate release of Mr. Caleb Thornwell on bond. Furthermore, I am opening a formal inquiry into one, Mr. Trevor Maddox. The courtroom exploded. Reporters bolted. People cheered. Others gasped. But all Caleb did was look for Zaria. And there she was, standing on the bench so she could see over the crowd, notebook raised high like a trophy. Grinning so hard her cheeks hurt, he walked straight to her, cameras flashing, phones buzzing. He knelt down and his voice cracked as he said, "You saved my life." She shook her head. "You saved Malik's. I just returned the favor." 1 week later, Trevor Maddox was in handcuffs. Evidence mounted like a tidal wave. Flight records, a cloned SIM card, surveillance from a gas station camera showing him near the warehouse, messages on a burner phone, and finally, a wire transfer from Hale's company to an offshore account with Maddox's name on it. The case flipped overnight. Caleb was no longer a suspect. He was a victim, a framed man. And yet, he didn't feel triumphant, because what haunted him wasn't just the betrayal or the headlines. It was the silence of everyone who once praised him, who vanished the second things got ugly. But not Zaria. She never disappeared. And that's why he found himself sitting in a tiny kitchen in East Street, Lewis eating fried chicken with a little girl and her grandmother. You sure you want seconds? Joyce asked, handing him another drumstick. I haven't eaten this good in months, Caleb said with a grin. Zaria giggled. You know, he said, looking at her seriously, you'd make a phenomenal lawyer someday. You think so? I know so. And you better keep your schedule open, because if I ever get in trouble again. Zaria raised her brows. I'm charging you next time. They both laughed. A real laugh. One that healed something invisible. Because here's the truth. This wasn't just a courtroom story. It wasn't just about betrayal or false accusations or even redemption. This was about the courage to speak up when no one else will. Zaria didn't save Caleb because she wanted fame. She saved him because someone had to. And let's be real, most adults would have just sat down, stayed quiet, and watched from the sidelines. But she didn't. And that's what makes her a hero. Not because she wore a cape, but because she dared to tell the truth when it mattered most. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something real. If you saw someone about to lose everything because no one believed them, would you stand up and say, I can defend them? Because maybe that's the kind of bravery the world needs more of. Not loud, not famous, just honest, just like Zaria Monroe.